are talking Crocodile Swarm from 2023. And this is written, produced and directed by the mysterious, enigmatic and totally exists Tyler James. This is actually a British production, and it is by many of the people associated with the Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey movies. Now, we don't have crocodiles in the UK. Is this set in the UK? Well, let's discuss. So, in a unspecified country, we have a situation where a woman and her kind of friends are going exploring in this cave system, and they are attacked by a swarm of crocodiles. Her sister, a few days later, who hasn't heard from her, gathers up a group of friends to go look for her. Now, this is meant to be some type of mine which has been unused, and they have to kind of get there by boat, and inevitably they come across these same crocodiles and have to fight for their lives. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, low budget British movies are nothing new to this channel. We review a lot of them, and a lot of them come out from the same few production companies. Okay, so let's talk about the crocodile in the room. We don't have crocodiles in the UK, as I said. Now, I think the movie, in some ways, is quite wise because they never specify that it's in the UK, and we have a couple of characters who use accents. There's a couple that I think are meant to be Australian, so it's sort of saying without saying this might be Australia. So let's kind of like give the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, this might be Australia, even though we can clearly see it's, if you're familiar with the UK, it's obviously the UK. But what can we say that works in this movie? Now, I have some idea of what these movies cost to make, so it is a very, very low budget film. But I have to say, it's nice to see a movie set in this kind of cave system. These type of movies that come out from these production companies often are some type of killer running around in a house chasing a bunch of girls, and it's nice to kind of get out in the natural world, so to speak, that isn't just the woods, and have a movie filmed in an actual kind of cave system. So I've got to say, I think the actual location shooting here does a lot of heavy lifting. It looks pretty cool. Now, does it look like a mine? No. It looks like a tourist attraction with various things, but, we'll touch on that again. But nonetheless, I still kind of quite like the fact that we have this adventure in this kind of cave system. It gives it this kind of quite, sort of like setting, which is apart from many of these movies that kind of come out, and, more of a kind of a dynamic location, really. And I think the movie, to its credit, is relatively kind of well filmed. These production companies pump out a lot of movies over a year, and even though the budgets are low, the turnaround is quick, they're obviously quite professional at doing it at this point. So even though it's something flashy, it's relatively kind of well shot. And one of the concerns you might have with a movie kind of set in caves is it going to sound all echoey and stuff. But I've got to say, I think the sound design stuff is actually fairly good. Now, admittedly, the caves are a little bit overlit, but we do. It does mean that we can kind of see what's going on all the time. I mean, it's clearly kind of like not a mine. It's a well-lit tourist attraction, but it does mean that we can kind of see what's kind of going on. So that's all pretty good. The CGI isn't good for the most part, but there are one or two shots where I do think the CGI crocodiles look quite good, from probably the minority of the time, admittedly, but there are still some shots where I do think the CGI looks fair at the very least. Again, we've got to consider the budget in these things. The pacing of this movie is quite it's quite well paced, I have to say. It's not a long film. The action starts relatively quickly. And you know, it doesn't kind of let up, and there's a variety of different kind of crocodile attacks as the film goes on, and you have this extra element where people are kind of somewhat lost in these kind of cave systems and stuff, which I think gives it a little bit of kind of tension here and there. I have seen some critiques of the acting in this movie, and whilst I don't think the acting is stellar, I think there are some kind of performances that are actually, again, pretty fair. There's like a guy with like longish hair, and you know, I think he's a UK actor, or Canadian UK, I believe, but he does a reasonable Australian accent, and I think some of his, like the way he's trying to kind of get people to hurry up and do things, you know, are fair. And we've got one girl, our lead girl, is constantly crying and screaming, and that might be annoying, I'll admit, but I gotta say, it's probably fairly sort of on par with what would actually happen if someone who was completely unprepared would find themselves in this situation. So I actually found, albeit yes, it kind of grates a little bit, but I gotta say, I thought it was probably a fairly accurate representation of what someone would actually kind of be like, if I'm honest. So, you know, critiques for the acting, I'm not saying it's the best acting, but I've got to say I actually think it's fair for this film, for this level of film. And there's even some things where I think it's, you know, I don't really have any complaints with it, to be honest. Maybe I watched too many B movies, who knows. But yeah, I didn't find that I had necessarily a problem with the performances here. Okay, so let's talk about what doesn't work. So let's kind of dive into some of those things that we've talked about and look at the flip side of it. It's clearly England. I mean, anyone from the UK who watches it will be able to see that those white cliffs look pretty kind of iconic. The country roads and things like this. I mean, more of an attempt could be done to make it look a little bit more indescript in regard to the country. But, you know, I guess people outside of the UK might not be as familiar with that, and you know, these movies, they tend to have kind of actors do foreign accents, American normally, so they can sell it to you know, markets. But I think the decision here was wise to give a couple of somewhat Australian accents at the very least. But yeah, I mean, it's you know, it is what it is. Let's look at the biggest issues here. The CGI crocs for the most part are pretty weak. Okay, so there's one or two scenes where I think that, you know, it's passable, but they are bad CGI crocodiles. You know, not good. They look kind of weightless. They're not particularly well rendered. Again, this is a low budget movie. I'm a little bit forgiving with some kind of low budget effects, but maybe for some of the kind of close-ups and the kind of you know, they could have made some, like, you know, a crocodile head or something that you could sort of have the kind of the actors sort of fight against. They did a shark film some years ago, and they did make a practical kind of shark head. I wish they would have done something like this. I'm sure that they have made other crocodile movies as well, so that would have been preferable. I'm not saying they should have done a whole animatronic croc or anything, but I think some of the kind of the quick turnaround shows and the fact that they haven't done this, and it's just kind of full CGI, sort of, you know, rudimentarily rendered creatures and stuff, which don't look good. I mean, you've got to suspend disbelief quite a lot in this film. The cave system, although I quite enjoyed this system of caves, and it does look quite cool, it's clearly not an abandoned mine. I mean, we have big railings, lots of lighting, including kind of in some of the kind of the kind of the pools of water and stuff, which you wouldn't have in a mine. And it doesn't look there's no like evidence of like a mining or anything like that. I mean, sure, a better script would have maybe, you know, maybe this used to be sort of a tourist attraction, and there was a cave in, or there was something going on, and there would have been a better way to kind of describe, to sort of try and get around this. But it's an unused mine, even though it looks nothing like that. And this cave system looks incredibly good condition and stuff. Again, this is a low budget movie. There's no like crap on the floor or anything like that. It's all the walkways are clear and everything. There's loads of light, all sorts of stuff really. So it is what it is. There are restrictions that maybe you can't get away from. But I think the script could have been better to try and work around this. To be honest. There's other kind of like sillier elements here, like these people going with no sort of like cave equipment. They're not wearing like helmets or anything like that, and we're meant to believe this is kind of an abandoned mine. Fine, it clearly isn't, but let's just kind of like go with it. But why wouldn't you be wearing protective clothing and things like that? You know, helmets, pads. Why wouldn't they be carrying like ropes, radios? None of that. It's very sort of like a bunch of girls wearing sort of somewhat skimpy clothes, you know, lowest common denominator stuff here. Let's just be honest. We find plenty of reasons for our characters to kind of split up and obviously get kind of picked off. And it's a bit hokey. I mean, the acting, like I said, I think the acting isn't as bad as maybe some people would say, but I'm also not saying this, the acting here it doesn't have its weaker elements to it as well. And there are some kind of like not strong performances, and some of the kind of like the dialogue is rather hokey and kind of trite. This movie also takes itself a little too seriously. I think maybe it could have had a bit more fun in a way, or be a little bit more campy. I think it may have, you know, crocodiles in England, they don't even exist. What do you mean? They're right there. That sort of thing. You know, could have had a bit more fun with it, and I think that would have given the movie a little bit more of a less sort of like generic kind of tone to a degree. So I don't think these are the worst of these sort of films that I've seen, if I'm honest. I do think this has some entertainment value if you really can kind of put your brain in neutral and don't be too picky about some of the kind of the details here. And I think maybe this would play better to people outside of England, outside of the UK, because you wouldn't pick up on the clear English stuff in it. So I'll give it a 4 out of 10. It's a below average movie, but I don't think it's terrible. So there you go. 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.